The bones of the thorax are the thoracic vertebrae, the 12 pairs of ribs, and the sternum. Connecting the upper 10 pairs of ribs to the sternum are the costal cartilages. The first rib is quite small. Like all the ribs, it's angled downward from back to front. We'll take a special look at the first rib in a little while. From the first rib to the third, the thorax widens in the shape of a dome to about 2/3 of its full width. From the third rib to the seventh, the thorax widens a little further in the shape of a cone. From the seventh rib to the 12th, the thorax narrows slightly and the ribs become very much shorter. The sternum, commonly known as the breastbone, consists of 3 parts: the manubrium, the body, and the xiphoid process, or xiphisternum. The manubrium is attached to the body of the sternum by a cartilaginous joint, at which a little movement is possible. There's a slight angle between the manubrium and the body, the sternal angle, that's easy to palpate, as is the upper border of the manubrium. The costal cartilages form a series of flexible, springy links between the ribs and the sternum. The first costal cartilage articulates with the manubrium. The second one articulates with the joint between the manubrium and the body, and the third to the 6th or 7th costal cartilages articulate with the body. Here's what the costal cartilages look like in the living body. They're quite flexible. These are the costochondral junctions, where the cartilages join the ribs. The lowest 4 costal cartilages, the 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th, join onto one another in series, forming the costal arch. The angle between the 2 costal arches is called the infrasternal angle. The xiphoid process projects downwards in the infrasternal angle, where it can easily be palpated. The 11th and 12th ribs aren't attached to the costal arch. Since they're not linked to the sternum, they're called floating ribs. The ribs, sternum, and costal cartilages form an expandable container for the lungs and heart. This large opening, formed on each side by the costal arch and the last 2 ribs, is called the inferior or lower thoracic aperture. It's almost completely filled in by the diaphragm, which separates the thorax from the abdomen. The much smaller opening above, that's formed by the manubrium, the first ribs, and the first thoracic vertebra, is called the superior or upper thoracic aperture. Now that we've looked at the thorax as a whole, let's take a look at a typical rib, the 6th rib. The rib is thin and flat and curved in the form of a spiral. At the back, there are 2 thickenings, the head and the tubercle, which are separated by the neck. The curvature of the rib is interrupted by this angle, which marks the insertion of the iliocostalis, a back muscle that we've seen already. At the front, the end of the rib is hollowed out for the attachment of the costal cartilage. The outer aspect of the rib is smoothly curved. Its inner aspect is marked on the underside by this groove, in which the intercostal vessels and nerve run.